Welcome to the Filmcast review of Roadhouse. I'm going to read the plot summary from the internet. Ex-UFC fighter Dalton takes a job as a bouncer at a Florida Keys Roadhouse, only to discover that this paradise is not all it seems. End quote. This movie is directed by Doug Liman, stars Jake Gyllenhaal. On the Filmcast After Dark, we talked about the original 1989 Roadhouse starring Patrick Swayze and how distinct it was. And I was really curious what approach they're going to take with this movie. Were they going to make it super dark and gritty? Were they going to lean into the silly elements of the original Roadhouse? The answer, in my opinion, is yes. Devindra, I'm very curious what you thought of Doug Liman's Roadhouse.
I think Doug Liman saw some UFC fights at some point and was like, I could do this. I could, if I was in the ring and I can actually shoot these scenes, that would be a ton of fun. And I think the idea of this, I don't know like the whole story of this project, but to me, it feels like the idea of this remake came from Doug Liman, a director I really like for many of his films, and he's had some misses too. But as an action director, I love him. I think he's really unique and really interesting. I have a sense he just wanted to play in this wheelhouse. He's like, Roadhouse. Yes, I could do fights with Roadhouse. I think this movie is a lot of fun, but it's not the original Roadhouse. And as we talked, like, I don't think the original Roadhouse is, I don't think it's an entirely great film, but it's so unique and funny and charming and sexy and weird that it is one of those like purely 80s creations that I think it's kind of folly to even try to redo or try to replicate. And this movie does try to do it in some ways. So I don't think this is going to be like a camp classic like the original Roadhouse, but as an action movie, as a starring vehicle for Mr. Jake Gyllenhaal, for a movie that does something really interesting with action choreography too, because Lyman and his stunt team did this like really interesting 4-pass method for shooting the fight scenes, which basically they composited 4 different scenes. So it looks like when somebody punches somebody in the face, it is not like a stage reaction. It looks like a fist hitting a face, an actual human reaction to contact and stuff. I find that like to be really compelling. I think the fights are fun. It's not super sexy, but it is a little romantic. We can talk about like one scene that happens that's kind of fun, which harkens back to Michael Mann's Miami Vice, which to me it has like some of the most romantic sequences I've ever seen in the movie. So I'm just a sucker for that thing. So the fact that this movie kind of reminds me of things I like and is enjoyable as an action movie, and has Mr. Jake Gyllenhaal, who I think can be funny and quirky at times. Like he's not Swayze, but he's certainly a guy that always has like a really interesting, compelling weirdness to him. I think that is in this movie too. I found it a lot of fun. It's not a great movie, and it won't be a classic like the original.
By the way, originally this movie was supposed to have Ronda Rousey as the main actor in the role. This is before
I could
Doug
see
Liman
that.
even signed on to the project.
Yeah, yeah.
That would have been, I think, a much more interesting version of this film.
Mhm.
Who knows how it would have turned out? Like if it would have been any good, but at least I think it would have been a
I
different
don't know.
direction.
I feel like, given what we see from Conor McGregor in this movie, maybe that would have been a little rough.
Jeff Kanata,
Good
I'm
God.
curious what you thought of Doug Liman's Roadhouse.
Well, Dave, I guess you could say what I thought of Doug Liman's Roadhouse is best summed up in the form of a limerick.
All right, let's hear it.
There's changes, and I have some notes. For one, there's too many boats. You can't outcool Swayze, but a remake feels lazy if you're not going to rip out some throats.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, they took away the defining characteristic of the
only
original
thing I know
Roadhouse.
about Roadhouse, not in the movie. Not a
This is
single throat
accidental.
ripped out.
An accidental throat ripping. Come on.
That wasn't A, not accidental, and B, not a ripping. It was more of
No,
a
I'm
crushing.
saying I would have taken an accidental one.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
not even in this movie. Yeah.
I agree mostly with Devindra. I had fun with this movie, but it's a weird thing because it sort of can't exist without 87's Roadhouse and can't exist
89's
with
Roadhouse.
it. Oh, excuse me, 89. It can't exist without the original, and it can't exist with it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I think if you just made this movie without a Roadhouse as just this Jake Gyllenhaal, Doug Liman action movie where he's a drifter who wanders into town and has to beat up some dudes. I think it would be a pretty fun action movie with, light on the, I don't know, necessity for being, but heavy on the fun, right? Like it's kind of as Devindra pointed out, Doug Liman can't help but direct awesome action sequences. He's just brings it with the action sequences. And there's some really rad stuff that happens and some visualization of things that I've never quite seen before, like stuff taking place in close-up where you go, oh, I don't want to see action in close-up, except here the action is in close-up because the action is actually happening and you see the actors reacting to it in a very visceral way. It is people being dragged around, thrown into things, but we're staying in close-up. It's like, I've never seen that before. It's a wild technique that I found very invigorating in a world where I think so much of action is just borrowing from video games. This felt like something completely unique and pushing at the boundaries of what we've kind of seen before with regard to hand-to-hand combat. And and there's other stuff that's not even hand-to-hand combat. There's like wild sort of set pieces that happen that just nothing like that happened in the first Roadhouse, right? There was nothing on the scale of the just pure set pieces that happened in this movie. And so I had a great time as an action film fan. I think this is a well-directed action film. I think Gyllenhaal is totally he's totally capable of carrying an action film. He and his 12 friends, each ab I'm talking about, are he's shirtless a lot. He's been doing some sit-ups. He looks great. He's in it. He's doing his own stuff a lot of the time, and it looks great. I'm down for him doing a movie with Doug Liman that's an action movie. Now, calling it Roadhouse and being like, well, this is a remake of Roadhouse, puts it in this weird place because it isn't really. I mean, it's sort of tangentially hovering around the themes of Roadhouse. And we heard in the trailer right before our review, like there's one line that's directly lifted, one line where he's like, nobody wins a fight. Oh, I remember Swayze saying that. And there's characters that are sort of like, I think that was like that. That was a little bit, it is a riff on a theme. It's not a cover song. It's like a Weird Al song. It's like, this is, I remember it's based on that ish, but it's its own thing, right? We're talking about eating food, not leaving the fight. It's I'm straining that metaphor, but you get my drift. And so like there are elements of this movie that if you weren't making a Roadhouse remake would be completely excised. You wouldn't include them at all. And ultimately the Roadhouse, which it's ridiculous that it's called Roadhouse. The place in the movie is called the Road.
Like, it's the imagination of this movie.
I mean,
to be fair, I live in Seattle. We have a bar called Some Random Bar in Seattle.
The imagination of Seattle.
But the funny, it's not based on a movie called Some Random Bar, the movie, right? No one says the words Roadhouse in the original Roadhouse.
It's true. That's
never
true.
spoken.
Yeah.
So the idea that we'd have to like hit that nail on that head so hard is very, very funny to me.
The boat is called Boat. Yeah.
But also the Roadhouse itself isn't very important in the movie. It
looks like a pretty nice place, actually, right by the water.
It's a pretty decent, like the first scene when he walks in the daytime, and I'm like, where's the big scene where we're gonna find out how awful this place is, and like you could completely write this movie. You would need to change very little in this movie to make it be a completely standalone movie that didn't have anything to do with a Roadhouse, right? It is, it's an albatross. It's like this vestige of a thing that's no longer necessary. It's ready to atrophy and fall off.
That's partially what's smart about it too. Like it's an unfortunate state of affairs right now. Like you cannot get a movie funded if you're not rebooting something, but maybe you've got some interesting ideas about you really want to shoot some UFC fights. So what if Roadhouse, but UFC,
And Gyllenhaal's great. He's no Swayze. But it isn't trying to be. The movie isn't trying to be. The movie is leaning into the angst of the character, which is, speaks to its time, the comparison of the times. And again, as you said, and you like pointing out, Devindra, it's completely sexless, as we've pointed out. Movies are now, and especially in comparison to the original, like, there's a hint that maybe something happened, but we're not even going to really tell you for sure if
you
they
mean
did
to
or
tell
they didn't.
me you're taking a boat there. There's no boning?
Yeah.
Really?
I mean, we think maybe, like, he comes back with his shirt off, but the movie is so chaste. It's hilarious compared, as a remake. And, it like doesn't deliver what Roadhouse delivered. It's just doing its own thing most of the time. I happen to think that thing is pretty entertaining, but it's a weird, you kind of have to review it in juxtaposition with the original movie. And in that way, it's like, what are we even doing here? But I think you're absolutely right. I think it's another example, of which we have many, of can't make a movie unless it's an IP we already know. Even if you want to do your own thing, it's got to be about Barbie. It's got to be about, it's got to be about this thing. So, it's an odd beast, this movie, but I had a lot of fun watching it. And I agree with Liman in that I watched it on my big projector screen that I have in my house. And I was called away for family thing, and I had to start it up again. And I was going to put it on the TV in my office. And I started it, and like 4 seconds into that, I was like, no, I got to put it back on the big screen. This is a movie that belongs on a big screen. It's big, it's bombastic, the action's fun and kinetic. I think it does deserve to be seen on a big screen, and it's a lot of fun if you like action movies.
Well, I'm so glad you guys enjoyed the movie. I'm
ready for this.
I'm going to say I think this is one of the worst movies I've seen in the last year.
Wow.
I really did not like. I was ready to be like, hey, grittier version of Roadhouse, bring it on. Good action scenes, bring it on. That's what I was ready for, right? I wasn't expecting high art. I wasn't even expecting any of Doug Liman's best work, like Bourne Identity or
Jumper. Like Jumper.
I had fun with Jumper.
Or what do you call it? What's that other one? Edge of Tomorrow, action movie classic. I'm just like, hey, I'm ready to just shut my brain off and have a little bit of fun. I'm gonna put it down to 3 things that prevented me from doing that. Okay. Thing number 1, I think the tone is a disaster in this movie. Like, I don't think it knows which direction to go in. And that becomes a real problem by the end of the film. Like, parts of the movie are really goofy. The trailer shows Dalton's first fight with these hooligans, and that is actually really funny. And he, like, it's
pays off really well.
It's great.
Pays off really well, and it's really well done. And I'm like, oh, if this is what the movie is going to be, I'm going to have a fun time with this. And then, but then it kind of starts veering wildly between tones from like ultra serious to goofy.
Well, then he turns into a psychopath.
Yeah. We'll talk about that later. But I thought the tone, just, they didn't nail down a tone. Like, Roadhouse 1989 original had a tone. It was out there. It was wild and fantastical and doing its own thing. Say what you will about the tenets of 1989 Roadhouse, it was an ethos. And this Roadhouse,
that tone. Listen, that tone escalates. Like, it starts a little crazy. It builds up to throat ripping and one man killing like 20 people in a house with his bare hands. Like, it is an escalating tone.
I don't know. I mean,
it's not a consistent tone.
I don't know. 20 minutes in, he's visiting the Roadhouse. There's like massive knife fights breaking out left and right. Like,
that's fine.
Okay. So anyway, problem number 1, the tone. Problem number 2, I don't like the way the fights are filmed. So Jeff it's actually really hard to describe, but essentially they use, so Devindra pointed out, well, like, they use this new technique where they're compositing different elements on, so it actually looks like people are absorbing the hits, as opposed to other ways they might do it where, like, the person's not actually connecting or, using some other technique. And the hits look good. I'll say the hits look good. But a lot of the movie is shot in, I would say, very wide angle, very close up. And with like these very like jerky camera movements that I appreciated that that Doug Liman and the cinematographer were trying to kind of put us in a very subjective experience. And they were doing all kinds of stuff. Some of the movies shot in first person.
Yeah.
And it's like, they're really trying to like drop us into the fight. Unfortunately, it didn't work for me. Like, and it made me realize, oh, there's a reason why most fights aren't shot this way. It's because it's really disorienting and unpleasant to watch, in my opinion. You can have a different opinion. And finally, the biggest thing that ruined this movie for me
Conor
can be
McGregor.
described with 2 words: Conor McGregor. I think he is from a whole different movie. Every time he opens,
He is from the original Roadhouse.
he wandered in from the original Roadhouse and
Yeah.
somehow made it into this movie. Every time he did anything, it ripped me out of the immersion of this movie because I could not get over the idea that this is Conor McGregor just being really happy to be in a major Hollywood movie. He looked very pleased with himself to be in this movie.
Well, I think the character is very pleased with himself.
Sure, but like in a very Bond villain-esque, like,
Yeah.
it goes towards my issue of like the tone too. Like, it's just he is from a completely different movie than Jake Gyllenhaal, who's trying to literally commit suicide in the first scene of this film. So, or in one of the opening scenes of this film.
Yeah.
Jeff Canada, it sounds like the Conor McGregor thing worked for you, though.
I had a blast with Colin.
Yeah.
I thought he was, a jolt of life, and it is goofy, it is over the top, but like this person for whom there are no rules. There literally are no rules. And what would it be like if you lived life where you just took whatever you wanted, did whatever you wanted, went wherever you wanted, and no one could do anything about it? I think that it's a funny notion, and it's played kind of funny. And he's a good, chaos agent for the film. I don't know. I can understand why his presence and his performance is off-putting, but it did not land on me in that way at all.
Yeah.
It was in accordance to what I was hoping for with this movie, which is like, let's have a good time. What the scene you just referenced, where it's like, I'm going to commit suicide, I was like, oh no, is that is that what this Roadhouse is going to be? Is it is it Donnie Darko, the Roadhouse movie?
That is a tonal misstep, because listen, it used to be you could have movies about trauma, but the original Roadhouse, the guy has a code. He has a philosophy. Because it's 2024, this has to be a movie about trauma. Like, that is just how so many things are deconstructed now. And I'm like, that's just a little much. Or at least like he has like a lightness to him. He has like, he's got jokes. He's got something. Like, where does that come from? Not just the trauma of what he did,
We also really don't know a lot about what happened, but it feels like this movie is setting up for a sequel where we really delve into that.
I'll say two things about the Conor McGregor stuff. One is, I was listening to Slash Film Daily, great podcast, and they were saying, what if there's like another version of this movie where the Conor McGregor character didn't speak? And I actually think that would work a lot better for me. Like, where he's kind of like a Bond sub-villain, where like, he doesn't talk that much.
Jaws.
Yeah, that would kind of be interesting, I think.
Yeah.
And then...
Well, I like how he's not good for anybody. Like, him being called in is bad for the bad guy and the good guy. Like, he's bad for everybody.
What was the bad guy trying to accomplish here?
Okay, well, let's talk about that. So anyway, the other thing I'll say is, here's what I feel confident about saying about the Conor McGregor. He is either a love him or hate him character. Because I wrote on Letterboxd about how I did not like his appearance in this movie. And I got a ton of people like Jeff just like oh, he totally made this movie work for me. And then another person writing like his performance was a crime against art. And I think it's whatever. It's a very polarizing performance. So I think you're either going to love him or you're going to hate him. Yeah.
I love an actor that's going to just, or a director even, that allows an actor to just go for it like that.
Decisions were made. So yeah. All right, guys, we have a few more things to discuss in spoilers. So let's get to spoilers for Roadhouse starting right now. During the main review, Devindra brought up, what is the villain's plan here? And I have to say, I have not been able to figure it out, guys. Because the idea is that
he's gonna knock down paradise and put up a parking lot. Ooh. No.
Well, the idea is that so one big difference from the original Roadhouse to this is that there's actually some broader significance to the Roadhouse. It is a black-owned small business that is trying to face down a rich white developer, and like there's a reason why the rich person wants to mess things up, right? Is because the Roadhouse is standing in the way of this big resort. How it's doing that, unclear, but also what is the plan? Because at one point they're like, okay, fine, just torch the whole thing, and it's like, why didn't you do that years ago? Like, what was
Maybe
stopping you
start
from
there.
just was stopping you from just destroying the Roadhouse from that?
Well, then they also don't do it.
Yeah, they also don't do it.
He tells him, he's like, all right, burn the whole
go
thing
mess it
down,
up.
and
Go
then
mess
no
it
one
up,
ever
and
does it.
Nothing happens. What is the plan? Anyway, so
it is weird. It contrasts that with the original Roadhouse, where the entire conflict is because you fired my nephew.
Right.
You
Which
fired my
like,
nephew.
Which
is the
again,
conflict.
at least makes sense. Like, I get why he'd be pissed about that.
I mean, I think that's comments on like where we are movie wise. It has to be the end of the world, right?
Right.
It has to be
some big, broader.
Yeah, it's a
conflict.
grand conspiracy that involves drug money and a giant resort that's going to go in. It's like the stakes can't be small, and I think that's a shame because the stakes were small in Roadhouse and it didn't matter.
Yeah,
right?
It's still ultimately small town. Like, these are small town stakes. In the original, it was just rich guy annoyed he was losing control of the town, right? Whereas this one's like rich guy just wants to own the entire town, just in a different way. Now the entire town's a resort. I don't know. I didn't find it that much different.
I'm gonna say that when Jake Gyllenhaal becomes full psycho in this movie was when I kind of perked up. I was like, oh, maybe
this is why
this movie's going to go in like a really different direction. And then it's like, oh, not really. Like he just starts straight up murdering dudes left and right. And I'm like, oh, okay. I'm gonna maybe like this is going to be with it. And then it like, but then the movie basically like ends after that. He does one big fight, the boat thing, and then a big fight scene, and then the movie's over.
He's definitely like, he's a guy who will murder somebody, store the body in his boathouse. Like, that is a different level.
Yeah.
Is that worse?
He's a psycho.
I think that's more psychotic than throat ripping.
I dig it. I like that it's going in that direction. I wish it had gone more
premeditated
full bore.
plans. I'm going to set up this cop because this dead body's here, and
when he has that conversation with that cop on the beach, that was like so creepy and well done. I love that whole all that stuff. And I was like, I could have had another 20 minutes of that. Basically.
The best part is that he does this whole speech about how you're going to not have any short-term memory, and then the guy totally remembers everything.
The guy remembers.
It's the best. That's hilarious.
I do want to give a shout out to Arturo Castro in this movie, he has like 18 lines in this whole movie, but every single one is a banger. Like,
that dude's a star. He's awesome. He's as Devindra pointed out, he's also in Molly and Max in the Future.
Right. He was great in Broad City.
Yeah.
I've always loved him. Yeah.
But when he's like talking himself out of getting killed by Jake Gyllenhaal, that part's really funny. Like when he first meets Billy Magnus's character, he's like, like kind of an interesting guy, this adult dude. It's like really funny.
I like when he describes how, I just wanted to ride bikes, and if you're in South Florida, you kind of have to be in a gang.
It's hard to do it by yourself, and it's like, wow, that would be difficult.
He just wants a social club. He wants a social life.
So funny.
He is great. Billy Magnuson is really like just carving out the center of just being rich douchebag, or evil guy in so many franchises. Yeah.
The scene where he's trying to get a shave on Bouncy Boat.
Yeah,
that's brilliantly
it's pretty good
conceived scene. I mean, the level of crazy Bond villain that is, like, I expect everyone else to make it so I can do whatever I want whenever I want, and that includes shaving myself without getting it, just
with a straight razor on a rocking boat.
It's just a level of insanity that is, it's so funny because it's a person who's just divorced. Like the laws of physics shouldn't apply to me. That's how narcissistic I am.
Shout out to Danielle Melchior, who I've loved in all the movies we've seen her in recently. Like, she's a very thinly drawn character here, but they do have the moment where she does the Miami Vicing. Get on my boat, boy. I'm going to take you somewhere off of Florida. In Miami Vice, they go to Cuba, and it's super romantic. Here, it's just like, a sandbar or something. Pretty cool. That looked cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Somehow
that was visually cool. She's great. She was good in the Suicide Squad.
Yes.
She was Ratcatcher. Very talented. I think has absolutely zero chemistry with Jake Gyllenhaal in this movie, unfortunately.
Also agree with that. And also somehow has less to do than the original Doc character.
Somehow.
I don't know how you
Somehow.
even manage that. Like, how do you have less to do than Kelly Lynch has in that movie? They did it. They pulled it off, everybody.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, that's the thing. When Jake Gyllenhaal starts going full cycle, I'm like, oh, big opportunity here for the movie to carve out a different path. And it does have a pretty different ending than the original. I will give it that. But
Mhm.
I was a
Extremely
little bit
different.
I was a little bit bummed that the movie didn't go in the direction of we're going to explore how dark this idea can really get.
I mean, again, talk about tonal like inconsistency. I feel like that would be going too far. I do want to say
Too
though,
far than Jake Gyllenhaal parking his car on a subway or a train track and potentially offing himself at the beginning.
I mean,
I don't
it's-
think once you have that and then his really upsetting UFC flashback.
Yeah.
It's like nothing is too dark for this movie in my
I
opinion.
mean, yeah, there is that. But listen, to me, like that would have been maybe a little much. I do want to say Dalton's plan. What was Dalton's plan to save his girlfriend? To ram,
blow
to
up
sink,
the boat.
to blow up the boat that she's likely being imprisoned on. Because
Like,
as soon as he does
that
that,
was
she
terrible.
starts sinking. She's trapped.
a
That was
terrible idea.
Terrible. No one
And-
has good plans in this movie.
No one has good plans.
I will say that was one of my favorite sequences in the movie when
Yeah.
he goes downstairs and she's trying to break the glass.
Incredible.
And then like one of the villains comes in and then the glass breaks open and water.
He
that was
shoots
like
it
really
open,
well
yeah.
done.
The camera
filmmaking
goes
from the
through.
filmmaking
Yeah,
perspective. Yeah, that was really
it's
cool.
great.
All of the
So-
boat stuff was rad. Like that fight on the boat where he's like, now we got our own octagon. It's like, who taught you shapes?
Good line. Yes. More of that, honestly. Like
Yeah,
more
he's
of the
getting his
quirk,
head
I feel like.
slammed in the piano. He's like, I think
Yeah.
this piano's out of tune. It's like this movie has a pulse. It has
This
a pulse.
is I feel like that's Jake Gyllenhaal leaning to could have been Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Could have been Spider-Man. Could have been quipping as Spider-Man, but not me, unfortunately.
Indeed. All right. Well, at the end of the day, despite everything I have said about this movie, it is really impressive that Doug Liman made a movie. Thank you so much for watching this video of the Filmcast. Check out these other videos that we have available, and be sure to hit like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon to get other videos from us in the future.
You can also go to thefilmcast.com to catch all of our audio podcast versions of all of our episodes.
And support this podcast at patreon.com/filmpodcast, where you can sign up for ad-free episodes and exclusive After Darks.
Thanks so much to everyone who makes the Filmcast possible.